Welcome to the History Nerds Now podcast. I'm your head nerd, Brendan. Thank you so much for being here. Today, Tracy Borman, her book, The Stolen Crown, on the Elizabethan succession. Try and say that 5 times fast. You cannot do it. It's impossible. Tracy's a huge deal anyway. This book is fantastic. The topic is over. Okay, like this book puts it to bed. Everything's done. We don't need to talk about it anymore because Tracy nails it. There's actually new information that she uses for this book. So this is not just another book on Elizabeth and we don't have anything new to say. There is new stuff here and we talk about it. So how about I shut up? Let's bring on Tracy. And here we are with author Tracy Borman, The Stolen Crown, Treachery, Deceit, and the Death of the Tudor Dynasty. Tracy, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, Brendan. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you all about some Tudor plotting, skullduggery, treachery, and all the rest of it.
Now, if I want to talk about you for a second first. You might be either the most hardworking historian in the world or exceptional at social media. Every day I follow you on Instagram. Every day it's, here's the 17 things I did yesterday. So is it a little bit of both? Is it one or the other? Is it just you're doing that much stuff?
At the moment, I'm doing quite a lot of stuff, I admit, because I'm on the UK book tour for The Stolen Crown, which is the biggest one I've ever done. So it's 45 events I'm doing between sort of end of August to end of November. And so it's joyous because people want to hear about Elizabeth. I tell myself it's Elizabeth, it's not so much James. But I'm also filming a new series at the Tower of London and I'm trying to get my next book edited. So organised chaos. I think I'd like to say it's all seamless and beautifully planned, but my life is pretty chaotic at the moment. But it's nice to take a bit of time out, actually, and just chat. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I feel very fancy that I get some 30 or so minutes with you, so I'm psyched. This book, I am on record, and I will say it again. The Elizabethan succession, it's over. It's done. You've written the book, and before we start recording, I said there are lots of books where an author will go laser focused on one particular topic, and just quite frankly, usually they run out of steam, and you're like, oh, I really appreciate that this author cares this much about the subject. I do not.
Yeah.
Also, as somebody who is not an Elizabeth fan overall, you kept me going. I even knew how it ended. Is that easier or harder for you as an author? Because I have to think it's easier because you know exactly you can cut out all of the extra stuff. But I also think you probably think, oh, am I keeping this interesting the whole time is something different.
Yeah, I actually really welcome having that focus, particularly for a subject as vast as Elizabeth and then well into the Stuarts, because the book does go into the kind of early Stuart period. And I actually really love coming at a well-known subject from a completely different perspective. So I was really glad to have the focus that was this discovery that I'm sure we'll get into that inspired the book, and then to just keep it all the time on the succession, because otherwise I found myself sometimes slipping into telling the story of Elizabeth's reign, because a lot of stuff happens in Elizabeth's reign and you've kind of got the Armada and Shakespeare and all the rest of it. And so I loved it. The sort of history I relish is what I call forensic history, where you get to go in and you look at something in detail. But of course, the reader is the forefront of my mind, and I had to keep building in the context, but without taking that focus away. So I'm really happy to hear, Brendan, that you think I achieved that, because there were times during the edit and I thought, have I gone too far down the road of just saying what happened in Elizabeth's reign, because that's how it felt sometimes. And then I had to bring myself back to the succession. But yeah, so thank you for saying it does remain focused and hopefully interesting as well, because, there's certainly, it's kind of a prism through which to see Elizabeth's reign as well. So you do get to find out what happens during her reign, but you never lose sight of this kind of issue that's bubbling away constantly. I was going to say beneath the surface. It's often not beneath the surface. And that's this vexed question of who on earth is going to be sitting on the throne after Elizabeth, the self-proclaimed Virgin Queen. I personally think it was the right decision not to marry. My favourite of all Elizabeth's quotes is, "I will have but one mistress here and no master." I mean, she'd fought for that throne. She didn't want to give away her power. But of course, the kind of payoff for that was that the succession was always going to be uncertain because Elizabeth wasn't going to produce an heir. So yeah, it was a fascinating and very focused journey of discovery for me.
What I find, and your book kind of reinforces it for me, this was one of the hardest interviews for me to prepare for because I kept finding myself, and you've seen the questions, so you know, I kept finding myself asking questions of historians that I don't like to ask, which is, what was she actually thinking? And Elizabeth, for good or bad, I feel like we're never going to truly know what was going on inside that head because she was masterful at, I am the crown and I am going to project something.
Yeah.
And what's actually going on in my head will never see the light of day. Or am I being dense? You tell me.
No, not at all. Not at all. And we'll never know. I mean, I can surmise and I can infer from the evidence that we have. I don't know how possible it is ever to truly know what went on in somebody's head. For Elizabeth, though, she was quite upfront about her reasons for not settling this issue that everybody wanted her to settle and just name a goddamn heir, you know. She was very upfront about it because she said that, you know, look what happened. I lived through this. I lived through being an heir to the throne and it was hellish. So during her sister Mary's reign, Mary married quite late in life as it was seen, you know, by the standards of the time. She was in her late 30s. So when most women didn't live beyond 35, that was considered late in the day to marry and have a child. And so it was obvious that if Mary died childless, then the throne would go to Elizabeth, her half-sister, because Elizabeth was the last of Henry VIII's children. So there wouldn't be anybody else. So even though Mary never named Elizabeth until the very end as her heir, everybody knew it was going to be Elizabeth. And that put Elizabeth in jeopardy, but it also put Mary in jeopardy, because the minute you have a successor who's very obvious, you have a rival and somebody to focus on for all those who are kind of dissenters of the regime, who don't really like the one in power. They'll gather around the heir. And Elizabeth was absolutely upfront about this. She said, look what happened in my sister's reign when I was, you know, the successor, albeit not named. And it put my sister in danger. It put me in danger. I'm not going to do that. And I do think actually that wasn't just politics and she wasn't just spinning it. I do think she kind of meant it because she knew how dangerous it was and that there'd been a rebellion in Mary's reign aimed at putting Elizabeth on the throne and killing Mary. So she knew how dangerous it was to name somebody your heir.
I mean, it's almost like having probably one of the biggest jerks of a father ever to exist might leave you with some emotional scars. I know you're a historian, you can't say it like that, but I can because I'm just an idiot podcaster.
Oh, I do. Believe me. I wrote an endorsement for a book recently about the six wives. And I said, you know, we should focus on the six women, not the dodgy bloke they all married. So, yeah, I get it. I like that.
Well, we're going to talk about that after we turn this off because I want that book. But
yeah,
we got to, like your book, we need to stay laser focused. So you mentioned this a little bit in one of your answers. Is this just another Elizabeth book? Is there anything new to say, Tracy?
Yeah, well, this whole book was inspired by a brand new, quite earth-shattering discovery. So it was one of those times where you remember where you were. And it was a couple of years ago, and I was here, where I was talking to you from, in my study at home. And I was working on a completely different book when there was a news flash. I saw, you know, should have had notifications switched off while I was writing, but I didn't. And there was a news flash from the British Library and it just said Major Elizabeth Discovery. So I thought, okay, that's it. I'm going to read this. What the British Library had done was to analyse the only contemporary source that said that on her deathbed, Elizabeth named James VI as her heir, verbally named him. And that source was written by a man called William Camden. He was a very distinguished historian working in Elizabeth's reign, and he wrote his biography while she was still alive, all the way up to her death. So historians for generations have relied on this biography, and I count myself as one of those. But what the British Library had done was to analyse his original manuscript. And what they had found is that after Elizabeth died and James was on the throne, Camden had been made to rewrite it, or at least rewrite certain sections of it. They noticed all these crossings out on the manuscript, but they also noticed how pages have been pasted in again and again. 200 pages in this manuscript had pages that had been pasted over the original text. So the British Library did this very clever thing. They kind of X-rayed the document. That's how I would describe it. It was using transmitted light, which enabled them to read the words underneath those new pages. And that's when they made this startling discovery that, far from saying, as Camden put in his published version, that almost with her last breath, Elizabeth says, "I'll have none but the King of Scots to succeed me." In fact, she died without naming a successor at all. And that is earth-shattering. I'm not overstating it because, for 400 years, we've seen Elizabeth's named heir, the front runner, the only obvious king. And what I discovered, inspired by this piece of evidence, is that actually there was any number of claimants who might have taken the throne instead of James. And it was not a one-horse race. In fact, it was a 15-horse race. That was the average number of claimants to the throne throughout Elizabeth's long reign. So it really was fascinating for me because it changed everything I thought I knew about the advent of the Stuarts here in England. And then when you take aside that and you look afresh at what was in fact the race for Elizabeth's throne, it becomes obvious it's a much more dramatic story. It's a much more uncertain story. And there were many, many claimants who might have just taken the throne in James's place. And now we know that Elizabeth decided just not to meddle in the matter. She left it to fate.
I don't know how I feel about a queen being like, "Oh, good luck, I'm dead anyway."
Yeah, I know.
At the same time, I respect it. I got to respect it. But just saying all of those claimants, and I'm just thinking back to your book, and I'm like, yes, so many people one step from the crown who just continually kept shooting themselves in the foot. Ultimately was James, because he just turned out to be the least dumb when it came to not ticking Lizzie off. Would that be accurate to say?
Love that. I think I might quote you actually in
Please.
future talk that I give, because I love that. He didn't tick Elizabeth off. In fact, I think it's quite telling that these two had a really long-running correspondence. They never met, but Elizabeth and James exchanged more letters than any other two sovereigns throughout the early modern period. So a 30-year correspondence. And it does look like Elizabeth is trying to help James. Like, she may never have actually named him, but she's giving him a lot of advice about how to run the show in England, So things like play the king. People in England like their monarch to put on a show. They love all the pomp and the pageantry. And you've got to work with Parliament. I know you don't in Scotland, James, but you've got to do that here. Things like that. And James is kind of paying lip service to all of this advice. And he's terribly nice to Elizabeth in his replies. "Thank you so much," and then ignores every last word. Because what does she know? She's just a woman. And this is an age where it's seen as monstrous, and that's a quote, for women to rule over men. And so it's a really fascinating correspondence. And I think Elizabeth is trying to give James the edge in this correspondence, but he just doesn't listen. And what it does is it helps James to the throne, although also certain members of Elizabeth's government do that. But because he doesn't listen to her advice once he's king in England, that then has catastrophic results, all the way up to the Civil War, the execution of James's son, Charles, because there's such a culture clash between the Tudors and now this new Stuart dynasty. But yeah, you're right. The other claimants, you think, oh my goodness, could you just stop shooting yourself in the foot? Sisters of Lady the sisters of Lady Jane Grey, Catherine and Mary, they both do the same thing, which is to marry in secret without asking Elizabeth's permission. And Catherine marries somebody else with a claim. So of course they're going to end up prisoners. And they never learn. And Arbella Stewart, even more, I mean, she is the classic example of really not helping herself. And she ends up a prisoner in the Tower. I've just been at the Tower of London today. I'm busy filming a series about the Tower, and it was very, very busy with claimants to Elizabeth's throne during her reign, I can tell you.
Well, and also James and Elizabeth should get along pretty well. There's no reason for them to dislike each other. It's not like Elizabeth killed his... Oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
Maybe James didn't tick Elizabeth off, but Elizabeth might have ticked James off a little bit. It's such a... Mary Queen of Scots.
Yeah.
It's so complicated. And you put it all down there, so I don't think we need... people need to read the book to kind of understand it. I just have a question for you. Did Elizabeth want Mary Queen of Scots executed? Or was she just a really bad communicator and Mary Queen of Scots got executed?
Oh, you've asked me now, Brendan, the $1 million question here, because, yeah, what did Elizabeth really intend? I think genuinely Elizabeth flinched from acting against Mary once she was prisoner in England, which she was for almost 20 years. Elizabeth, I think, was content with that status quo, just having Mary as a prisoner. But her council for nearly 20 years were putting her under pressure to do something about Mary, to have her executed. And Elizabeth always rightly pointed out, look, there's no evidence. I don't have enough evidence against her. So she didn't act. But I don't think she wanted to act either, because it was a huge thing to put an anointed queen to death and creating a bit of a precedent. Who knows, somebody could do the same to Elizabeth. So she didn't want to do it. But then when Walsingham, her great spy master, delivered up the evidence for her, when yet another plot gathered ground, this one led by Anthony Babington in 1586, and Walsingham managed to intercept the correspondence between Babington and Mary, and he got proof. And he delivered it to Elizabeth. So Elizabeth, she wasn't now going to stop a trial happening. And Mary was swiftly found guilty. But she did take her time over signing that execution warrant. She dithered and she procrastinated, and she found every excuse under the sun not to sign it, until eventually, almost 3 months later, she did sign it. But herein, as Shakespeare would say, lies the rub, because she signed the execution warrant, but technically she never ordered it to be carried out, and she had to do both of those things. So when she claimed, as she did to James, look, this was done without my sanction, she was kind of right. I think she played on it a bit much, because at the end of the day, she did sign the execution warrant, but she never did give the order for it to be carried out. So she really went for that when apologising to James. It's like, oops, chopped your mum's head off. Terribly sorry about that.
My bad.
My bad. But she calls it, and this is wonderful euphemism on Elizabeth's part, she calls it that miserable accident. And it's like, it's all totally unintentional.
Is there any more British phrase in history?
I know.
Like that I
nails executed your mother. What a miserable accident that was. Now let's go and have a cup of tea, if they'd had tea in the Tudor period. The thing was, though, it's such an interesting moment in their correspondence, because James, you might think he's going to be furious because Elizabeth killed his mother. But actually, James grew up not knowing his mother. He was just 13 months old when she was forced to abdicate and then later fled to England. And he was raised by men who hated Mary. So he had a pretty negative view of her. But half of Scotland wanted him to go to war on Elizabeth to avenge his mother's death. So he was kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. And in the end, he sort of made a bit of a show of being really quite cross with Elizabeth for executing his mother. But then they just agreed, let's not mention it again. And they don't. And so Mary's like the elephant in the room in their correspondence going forward. Neither of them refer to that miserable accident ever again.
Oh, politics, you gotta learn. And listen, we've talked about people shooting themselves in the foot, Mary Queen of Scots. For all of her positive aspects, there was, oh boy.
Yeah.
When I look at this, and you mentioned her before, Lady Arbella Stewart, that's the one that, when I see James and Elizabeth going back and forth, I'm like, hey, these are two monarchs. They're older. They know what they're doing. They're playing the game of politics. I feel like it's specifically with Arbella, that's where this stuff gets gross, where these manipulations, it feels like, especially for her, she was so young, she's basically locked down when she's almost becomes an orphan, or her grandmother takes her in, and because she might go to take the crown at some point because of her bloodline, she's basically locked away, almost like in a prison. And I feel like the way her life goes, I had a lot of sympathy for her as somebody who was caught up in something that she was never old enough or mature enough to even understand what was going on.
Yeah.
Am I feeling too much for her? What do you think?
No, she is. I'm with you, because she is my favourite of the claimants to Elizabeth's throne, and the one that I just think has the most tragic story. Quite a few of them do. Royal blood tends to be a curse more than a blessing, but Arbella more than most, because I think a lot of her downfall, her undoing, was due to this really unfortunate upbringing in the household of her formidable grandmother, Bess of Hardwicke. I'm not sure how well known she is in the States, but she's really celebrated here. Bess of Hardwicke, she's this great matriarch of the Tudor age. But when it came to raising her granddaughter, on the one hand, she made Arbella very aware of her royal blood and, you know, how important she was. But on the other, as you say, she denied her any freedom of action. Arbella was still having to sleep in the same room as her grandmother when she was well in her 20s. So what it meant was Arbella grew up very haughty and arrogant, but with no shrewdness or kind of experience of the world. So she just didn't get how the Elizabethan world worked. And it meant that she made awful decisions, and she was quite unstable. I mean, Elizabeth's council described her as being half mad, which may have been a bit of an exaggeration. But when you read her letters, they're kind of just streams of consciousness, and it's like she's got this deep-seated paranoia that everyone's out to get her. And she does end up ultimately making a really bad decision of marrying in secret. Again, a lot of them do this.
So much.
That's so much. To William Seymour, who is a grandson of Lady Catherine Grey. So she kind of makes the same mistake as her husband's grandmother. And they end up in the Tower. But then it gets really dramatic, because the plan had been to get them both across the Channel, to get them out the Tower, because James wasn't popular by this part of the story. And so somebody helps them escape from the Tower. Now, I can tell you, I work at the Tower. In 1,000 years, we've only had 11 escapees. So it's very likely they had help. And they made it to the Channel, to the English Channel, in 2 separate boats. But then Arbella, again, a bad decision. She insists on waiting for her husband's boat before carrying on. And that delay of a few minutes proves fatal, because the English authorities catch up with her. They take her back to the Tower, and she will die there. She just dies, having gone on hunger strike, really. And her husband's boat actually appeared a few minutes later, and he made it safely over to the continent. So it's just one of those tragic what-ifs. And I think such an unfortunate upbringing for Arbella. It really didn't shape her into the stuff of which great queens are made.
I have to say, we'll never be able to answer this question, but an Arbella monarchy, that would have been wild. There would
wild
have been
is the word.
Yeah, I mean, if she survived more than a week, but it would have been off the chain. I think the kids still say that.
Oh my gosh. It would have been, is that, and I haven't heard that one. It would have been absolutely unreal. I mean, never a dull moment if Arbella had been queen. Very, very unpredictable, very volatile, but huge amount of fun. I'd like to watch that one.
yeah, no, definitely. The question that kind of comes to me at the end of the book, and again, it's one of those, the great what-ifs of history, was the way Elizabeth handled this best for England?
Yeah.
It's very clear it was best for her, right? We've already established that because she saw what happened with Mary. She knows how these things go. And then the question becomes, was this best for England? Because that's the title of the book. James had to steal that crown.
Yeah.
But also, when you look at all the other claimants, he probably was still best suited for kingship, even though he fumbled hard. Is that something that you kind of still think about, or is this one of those things, as a historian, you have to just let it go because you're like, I know I'm never going to figure this out?
Yeah, I know. And it's one of the great what-ifs. Well, it's the greatest what-if of the whole book. So, yeah, he technically stole the crown, because what we haven't even mentioned is that James was illegal as a king of England, because Henry VIII, our dear friend, had passed laws against the Scottish kings ever being king of England because he hated the Scots, he hated the Stuarts. And so actually just on legalities alone, James should not have been king. You can see why he was considered by members of Elizabeth's government as being kind of the best of a bad lot, in that he had experience of being king. He was a man, big plus, and he had a ready-made dynasty. He had kids, he had sons, so there'd be no anxiety over the succession. So he did have a lot in his favour, and I think if only he had just listened to that advice that Elizabeth was trying to give him, then things would have worked out a lot better. But the most tantalising what if for me is, what if the law had been followed? Because if the law had been followed, then actually the man who would have been king was an Edward. And he was the eldest son of Lady Catherine Grey, who, according to the terms of Henry VIII's will, his acts of succession, was next in line behind his own children, so behind Elizabeth. So, we'd have had a King Edward VII in 1603, not in 1901 when Queen Victoria died. But the thing is, we don't know much about this Edward. He's quite a shadowy figure. Who knows? He might have been airbrushed from history as well, thanks to James, because he would have seen him as a threat. Would he have made a good job of it? We'll never know.
There's so many questions. They drive me nuts while reading your book and I know everything I need to know now. Damn it, I still have questions and we're not going to be able to answer them. I don't know how you historians do it, because I'd finish the book and be like, the book can't be finished because I haven't answered all of my questions.
Sorry about that. I'll have to write another one.
No, please do. We'll have you right back on. I'll read it. I want to send you back in time magically. And I'm going to let you talk to any one person from your book. I'm taking James and Elizabeth off the table. That is too easy.
Yeah.
But you get an hour to interview one person from your book. Who's it going to be?
Oh, wow. Now, that's a toughie, actually, because obviously my first choice would have been Elizabeth if you hadn't taken her off the table. Now, we've already talked about Arbella. I would love to have spent kind of an hour with her. But I think, actually, of all the characters in my book, I would like to have talked to Catherine Grey. I've been fascinated by Catherine for a number of years because the Grey sisters just have such a tragic history. Lady Jane Grey, the eldest sister, was queen briefly, the 9 days queen, before she was executed by Elizabeth's sister Mary. But these two Grey sisters, they were really powers to be reckoned with, forces to be reckoned with. And Catherine Grey, even though she was at the centre of things, she's quite hard to get to know. Some people call her a feather brain, really not very clever, easily led, while as others say that she was very shrewd, very cunning. And I would love to just spend a bit of time with her, especially as what I do know about Catherine is that Elizabeth could not stand her. She hated Catherine. That could have been to do with the fact that Catherine was younger and more beautiful than Elizabeth, allegedly. Or it could have been because Elizabeth saw her as a real threat. Or actually, maybe Catherine was just really obnoxious. But she was such a key player and had such a tragic life. Like Arbella Stewart, Catherine, once she was imprisoned by Elizabeth, she went on hunger strike and probably starved herself to death. And she was just 28 when she died, which is so tragic. But here's a woman who might have been queen. Yeah, I think it has to be Catherine Grey as my first choice.
I think for me it would be, you mentioned her Bess, because I want to be like, do you know how much you're screwing up your granddaughter? Oh my God. Let her go out and get some air, for God's sake. This is crazy.
I know. She's correct. What was she thinking? I think Bess of Hardwick was such a control freak, and she was so determined to get it right that it was counterproductive. She should have given Arbella a much freer rein to experience life. And instead, she kept her a virtual prisoner at Hardwick Hall. I mean, there are worse places to be a prisoner, but really... And that's why Arbella is just desperate for freedom and makes these awful decisions in a bid for freedom. And no wonder she falls foul of both Elizabeth and, in fact, James as well.
I mean, whenever I feel bad about, I have a 10-year-old daughter, and sometimes, you're a parent, you're just kind of like, I don't know how well I'm doing this.
Yes.
Pick up a book on the British monarchy. You will immediately feel better about how you treat your children. You can't do worse. You really can't.
Oh, gosh, not a great track record of raising heirs and children, really. I think my favourites among those, we're going slightly off topic, but are the Georgians. I mean, wow. They make the Tudors look like kind of parents of the year when you look at the Georgians and how they either kind of exiled their own children to a different country or plotted to kill them or whatever it might have been. Yeah, I think really, the Tudors weren't so bad when you look at the Georgians.
Or just, especially if you look at, I feel like the Henrys have a very spotty record. They're either quite good or quite terrible at it. They're one or the other.
Yeah. I think you're right, actually. And you get loads of examples in history of fathers hating sons. And is that something about you don't want to look at the future because you know this guy will become king, but only when you're dead? And it creates tension. I think we would call them dysfunctional families.
Slightly,
today.
yes. No. I do love, you're not supposed to do this, but taking what we know now about trauma and then looking back in history and going, oh, listen, they didn't know how badly they were screwing everybody up, but they also should have had kind of an inkling. But I also think when you're talking about the monarchy and you're talking about Elizabeth, there are things, especially coming from Irish Catholics, that we would be very upset with.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't think you can be a normal person and be a monarch.
It's difficult.
Yeah. It's you're expected to be something that a human being should not be, which is absolute.
Yeah, exactly. In this age when monarchs rule, it's not just a sort of ceremonial position. It's very, very hard because do you ever have real friends as a monarch? Do you ever really have a grasp of what it's like for most people living in your country? Probably not. And for Elizabeth, it's even more bewildering because she's gone from being heir to the throne to being a bastard, back to being an heir to the throne, to being a prisoner in the Tower, having her mother executed, and then finally she becomes queen. I mean, what sort of person is that going to create? One who is endlessly fascinating to me is what it is.
I think no matter what, we can all agree Henry VIII sucks. I think that's...
Oh, God, big time.
Yeah.
I mean, you can make excuses for him. You know, he wasn't ever meant to be king. He had an elder brother. He had a lot of disappointment in life, but really, he was a monster. Let's be real.
He made for a great TV show, though. We'll leave that at that.
Yeah.
Now, Tracy, we talked about how busy you are. And I want to know, do you ever get to just read nonfiction for fun? Who are your favorite authors? And I'm going to preempt you because as I said, I read the whole book, including the acknowledgments. So I'm going to jump ahead and say you're going to say Gareth Russell and his forthcoming book on the James we were just talking about, which it's titled Queen James, I believe, in the UK, and it's going to be the 6 Loves of James I in the US.
Yeah.
So I have to feel like he's going to be on there. He seems to be beloved by all. I'm going to have to ask him about that.
Oh, Gareth would always be top of my list. He is incredible. He writes as he talks. He's one of the most engaging people I've ever met. Incredibly funny. I kind of think he should be a stand-up historian, if you like. He's amazing, very funny. And this Queen James book is stellar. It's extraordinary and really gets under the skin of James by exploring his private life, his love life, of course, his notorious relationships with male favourites, if you can call them that. Very, very complex man. I'm talking about James now. Gareth, I think, is less complex, but just as fascinating.
Well, I'm interviewing Gareth in about 3 weeks, so hopefully he's not that complicated.
Oh, he is. You're going to have fun. He's amazing. He is amazing. Alison Weir, for me, is a huge inspiration. I would actually credit Alison with my writing career because she's Britain's best-selling female historian, and I admired her work for many years. And she was so generous with me when I was starting out and really encouraged me and helped me shape an idea for a book. And I just read Alison's books avidly. They're so authoritative, yet so engaging. And of course, she writes fiction as well as nonfiction. And I have to say, it's kind of my guilty pleasure in that when I read for fun, it is mostly fiction, actually. It tends to be historical fiction, but it is mostly fiction because I think I read so much nonfiction when I'm researching that it's quite nice to have a little bit of downtime.
Oh, it is fun asking that question, especially the British historians, because you seem to all know each other, and with zero exceptions, you are all so supportive of each other as well. Like, your books will overlap, but it's like, oh yes, I wrote this, and this is just like this, and it seems like it's very inclusive, very positive. Or is that everyone's just faking it and I'm falling for it?
Oh, no. It's a really lovely community, actually. I'm sure there are exceptions, but I haven't come across them. And it's lovely and supportive, because it could be the opposite way. You're right. It could be super competitive and a bit cutthroat. But I think you become a historian because you absolutely blooming love it, and you're passionate about your subject. So you're kind of among like-minded nerds, actually, topically. and so that's what it's all about. And it's great to kind of share that passion with other people who love history. So, it's not like the world of corporate finance or whatever it might be. This is history, and you get a lot of nerds, and you get a lot of people very, very passionate about their subject. And it's just a delight to be able to meet those people, chat with them, exchange ideas. So it does feel like a real community.
And it really is not a zero-sum game, because I am living proof that I'll just take any book people will send me. I don't say no. It's a problem that I have no intention of doing anything about. So
good.
Yeah.
Long may that continue.
All right, Tracy, last question for you. There's been a lot of Elizabeth books out there. There's been a lot of people who are like, Elizabeth is somebody I learned about in history class. I'm done with it. She can't be interesting. You and I both know these are just poor, misguided souls. They don't know better. But if I sat one of them in front of you and they said, why should I read The Stolen Crown? What would you say?
Well, this is a story that really changes 400 years of history. And not only is it about this kind of earth-shattering discovery that actually we shouldn't have had the Stuart dynasty here in England in 1603 when the Tudors ended, but also I think just looking at the succession, keeping the focus on that, you get a whole different perspective on this most famous of English queens, Elizabeth. You see her sometimes in a good light, often in quite a bad light. And this is somebody speaking who absolutely loves Elizabeth. But, you see her warts and all, as Oliver Cromwell said, in the 1650s. And it's just a really fascinating view of what a turbulent time it was. And I think for me, it made me set aside hindsight for the first time in my career, because we know Elizabeth is the longest reigning Tudor. She sticks around 44 years. But when you look at the succession, you don't get that. You get a country who is riddled with anxiety, because they think, well, look at Elizabeth's three predecessors. They only managed 11 years between them on the throne. So every day almost people are expecting Elizabeth to die. And she nearly does 4 years into her reign. And so the issue of the succession is absolutely front and centre in a way that I never realised before. People don't want to go back to the Wars of the Roses. They still talk about the Wars of the Roses when England was at war with itself. And they think that's going to happen every day of Elizabeth's reign, because she hasn't named her successor. So it just gives a completely fresh and I think very dramatic perspective on a very, very well-known reign.
Tracy, I totally agree. It's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on and talk about it.
It's been an utter pleasure. Thank you.
And that's it for this episode. Tracy, thank you so much for coming on. The Stolen Crown. Go out and get it, folks. I'd never lie to you. It's absolutely fantastic. It's a must-read. An absolute must-read. In the meantime, hit us up Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Don't forget the YouTube channel. Till next time, nerds, stay cool.